All right, Tanya, it's about 6 after 10. Should we start?
Very good. I think Randy's going to do our welcome and invitation this morning.
Good
Oh,
morning.
sorry.
My name is
Knew
Randy
that was going to
McDonald.
happen.
Pardon? Good to go? Okay. Good morning. My name is Randy McDonald. I'm the coordinator of Hospice Volunteer Services for the North Branch of Granite V&A here in the Lakes region. Thank you all for attending. Our first presenter is Sherry Shaw, who is a spiritual care counselor at Granite V&A Hospice. Spiritual care is a second career for Sherry, who was a teacher before going back to seminary to earn a master's in divinity and chaplaincy. She has worked in senior living, hospital, and hospice settings. She'll be talking on practicing presence, being versus doing, and not there to fix. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's lovely to see you. Hope you can all hear me okay. And it looks good. Okay, I'm just going to go from here. We're going to start this morning a little bit with a centering activity. I know that in just the process of your morning and getting here, sometimes we can be in a lot of places at once. We're here physically, but our minds are someplace else. Not uncommon for the busyness of our lives. I'm going to start with our favorite poem of mine. Many of you may have heard of it. It's called Let Evening Come by Jane Kenyon. But what I would like to invite you to do is that anytime you hear the phrase, let evening come, try to be intentional about taking a breath. And that may help you to consider the words a little more deeply or just gather yourself. Let evening come. Let the light of late afternoon shine through the chinks in the barn, moving up the bales as the sun moves down. Let the cricket take up chafing as a woman takes up her needles and her yarn. Let evening come. Let dew collect on the hoe abandoned in long grass. Let the stars appear and the moon disclose her silver horn. Let the fox go back to its sandy den. Let the wind die down. Let the shed go black inside. Let evening come. To the bottle in the ditch, to the scoop in the oats, to air in the lungs. Let evening come. Let it come as it will, and don't be afraid. God does not leave us comfortless, so let evening come. A big breath and out. I'm going to jump right in today. Randy, thank you for the introduction. I am Sherry Shaw, and I'm a chaplain right now with Hospice, Granite V&A. I love my work, the people I work with, the families and the patients that I serve, as I'm sure so many of you feel the same about what you do. And we want to be as equipped as we can to do the job as well as we can. So I'm going to see if I'm going to be successful here in sharing my slides with you. I'm going to click on these and hopefully they come up the way they're supposed to. And I'm gonna say, play from start. I'm talking to myself. You're gonna learn a little bit about my idiosyncrasies as I do this. Okay, so I'm starting here. We're talking about presence today. And the first thing that always comes to mind when I think about presence is the fact that it's more than words. When I get nervous in a space, I like to talk a lot and fill the space. Somehow I find it personally comforting, but it's not always comforting to everybody around me. And one of the most challenging things I find as a chaplain, we do a lot of work with presence, is when I'm working with our wonderful teams. Nurses come in with something very tangible to do, to administer medication, or social workers have some forms to fill, and sometimes I feel empty-handed. And I forget about the importance of presence, just the being in a space. And so that's our focus today, because whatever it is we may do in working with those who are hurting, dying, struggling in some way, is we are always with them, and the quality of our being as we're in that space can do wonders. So today we're going to talk a little bit about presence and also how that's related to mindfulness. And I came up with this, or found this nice quote from this doctor. It says, "Depression lives in the past and anxiety lives in the future. Alternately, calmness and peace of mind live in the present." So as we come into spaces where we're volunteering, we're working with others, mindfulness is something we may practice individually, but that work that we do in cultivating mindfulness will be evident in the quality of our presence as we're able to be in the now moment. Hopefully that will be felt as a sense of calm and peace. Now, I've come up with the 3 P's of presence that kind of help direct my own work. And it started, I would say, in 2007, before I ever considered working in this field. I had personally had a hospitalization. I was in the hospital for a number of days, and hospitals are busy. People have tasks, people are in and out. And I think as a patient, I had become acclimated to the speed and the way things were done. Well, while I was there was a hospitalist who came in to visit, and she stopped by my bedside. She talked with me, and then she kind of hovered. It felt like she was hovering. It honestly first made me a little uncomfortable because I wasn't quite sure what it was she wanted or what she was doing or why she wasn't leaving. But she just kind of slowed her pace down. She asked me some questions about, when I go home, what would it be like? What would I do to nurture myself? She talked a little bit about tea and drinking chamomile tea and those type of things. And so from that time, looking back now, I realized that this was a person who had taken time to be prepared before she came into my space. She was aware when she came close, when she was within my proximity, of how that might impact me. And she slowed down her pace. She wasn't quick, she wasn't fast. Her pace was noticeably different from all of the other individuals that came into my proximity. And it stood out all of these years. So for me, those were the 3 that informed my work. I learned a long time ago, as we're talking about preparation, you cannot give something that you do not have. You just can't do it. If I don't have it, I can't give it. So if we don't begin with preparation, we really are going to show up to the work with maybe our small reserves to offer, but not a lot. It's going to be hard to draw from an empty well. What I like to do before a visit, before I come into connection with another person, is take time to center myself. I may do that in the morning. I try to do that before I step into anybody's space, their home, their room, next to their hospital bed. I brought this is one of my little glass cups of stones I've collected from the ocean. Sometimes I put these, often I'll have something in my pocket. Sometimes it's this, it might be beads that I touch. It just brings me back to the now moment. There could be a key word you might want to say, a phrase that helps center you. Often I'll use this phrase, all is well, and take a minute to take a breath. It could be anything for you that brings you back to this now space where you feel like your mind and your body are in alignment. It's the only way I can word that. Equally important is when that visit is over, that you take a minute to digest all that's happened. In my work, there's always a lot of time to do that. And that may be true for you as well. But at some point through the day, at some point, hopefully before you enter another space, you're able to do a little bit of processing, even if it's recognizing that you need to put it someplace and come back to it later. That's something you are mindful about. You will have been with people and you're going to step into spaces where there's pain and suffering, there's questions, there's uncertainty, there's fear, there's all kinds of things swimming around the environments that we're in as we're caring for people. And we cannot think that that doesn't somehow impact our own being. It does. And so with that then is the importance of just self-care always. Self-care, I know, can be this buzzword, but for those of us caring for others, we have to care for ourselves. If we're going to care for somebody else, we have to care for ourselves. And I think with all that's out there on self-care, I think for me, if I can answer the question, what fills me? Because that's really, I think, when we come to the heart of it with self-care, is what fills me. It could be the massage and the bubble bath that we talk about, but it could be a lot of other things. Walks in nature. In a lot of these, we are just kind of what we already know or might rattle off on the top of our head. But really only you can answer the question of what fills you. There are times if I sit for a minute for a long time, walks outside fill me. Somehow getting out of an indoor environment is wonderful. But then after a few months go by, I think I need to put my hands in dough. I just want to knead dough. And that does the trick. And I don't need to knead dough every single day for my self-care. But if I'm mindful and I'm taking a little bit of time to check in, that need to touch dough comes up and I hey, it rises. The need to touch dough rises. Get it? Dough rising. Anyway, that's important. Find out what fills you and do that. Make room for that so that when you come into somebody else's space, you're able to be truly present. The next thing is proximity. Everything that I learned this when I was training as a chaplain, my mentor said, everything you need came with you when you crossed the threshold. And for me, again, in spiritual care, thresholds are very significant. As I'm stepping across that threshold, might be somebody's home, hospital room, any space where the patient and the family may be, maybe physical, but maybe even imaginary. I feel it's entering into a sacred space. And so again, I've prepared myself and now I'm stepping in. We're getting close to this encounter, this time where presence is evident. Use of self is probably a phrase, I know we've used it, I use it a lot in spiritual care. And I used to think this was, what kind of stories could I tell that would let somebody else know that I understand them? And that can be true. We can find commonality, we can find connection by what we bring, our experience. But there's a subtle way to use your experiences, and that's again without words. As someone else is sharing their experience, it might bring up a memory of something that you have experienced yourself. It doesn't always necessarily need to be spoken. Sometimes that memory can simply serve the purpose of stirring compassion and empathy within us. It kind of enlivens our presence without using words. Because somebody's sharing a story and you think, oh, that reminds me of the time I was in the hospital when the doctor came in, but I don't necessarily need to bring that into that space verbally without it and allowing it to be there non-verbally. My heart is quickened and I've used myself without words. Therapeutic touch is sometimes a good thing to do. Again, I always caution when we talk about touch, there's that permission piece. But if emotion is stirred, sometimes resting your hand on somebody's hand is okay, or on a shoulder. You have to be gentle and careful with that. Maybe just say, is it okay if I touch your shoulder? This seems like a tender moment. Those kind of things. Asking for permission can be very seamless and calm. But that brings you closer. And the other part I would say is to be aware of surroundings. I sometimes can get very caught up in the words that are happening, the story that's being told, what I'm hearing with my ears, that I forget sometimes within the closeness of a space to really take in visually what's around me. If people are in settings that aren't their home, they sometimes bring in things that are meaningful to them. If they're only going to bring in a few items, why did they select those particular items? There's probably significance to those. If they happen to be in their home, they may have photos, memorabilia, collectibles. These are all important to even, sometimes we might talk about them, but sometimes they may just inform us of who this person is, what's important to them. And again, just stir connection and empathy and compassion. The last thing that of the three is pace. We talk about pace and slowing things down. And I think that we can do that with the way we talk, the way we listen, the way we breathe, the way we move. All of it has to do with our pace. And it can be very noticeable to the person that you are near. As I told you at the beginning, that's what stood out to me, I think, the most of this particular hospitalist was the slowness. To me, it seemed exaggerated just because everyone had been moving so quickly. But she stood out for me the most because of her pace. So Robert Louis Stevenson has said that quiet minds cannot be perplexed or frightened, but go on in fortune or misfortune at their own private pace, like a clock in a thunderstorm. Very steady, no matter what's around them, very steady. Pauses and silence sometimes are wonderful. And I think they get neglected or overlooked because they also, for somebody who has any concern or worry, they can be anxiety provoking in that, what do I do with this space? Something needs to happen here, and what should I say? I think last session you all may have been in, there was some discussion about what's helpful to say and helpful not to say, or what words could be harmful to say. And here, it's just taking time to pause once in a while. Somebody shared something, to sit with that. If you sit with it for a moment, it's sometimes amazing what else may come up in that silence. Take time to digest what you're hearing in the silence. Often there's a lot being said behind the scenes. There's a lot of meaning to things that aren't said explicitly, but you can still hear them if you take a moment to really listen to them. I think I'll share this because I think I have a little bit of time here to share this quick story. I was with an older gentleman. I don't know how much he really wanted to talk about spiritual things, mostly because I took my cue that when I was with him, we would visit or watch The Young and the Restless. That's what he wanted to do with me. So I would sit next to him in his room and Young and the Restless would play. And if I wasn't looking at him face to face so much, but watching the screen, he would say things that were revealing about what was really in his heart. This was a gentleman, as we watched, he noticed one of the characters was dressed in a tuxedo. He was quite handsome looking older man, chiseled look and all. And he said to me, "That's a very important person." I said, "Really?" And I waited and he said, "He's very intelligent." Now, I just kind of waited and through our conversation, what I was hearing is of all the things that were happening in that whole show, he's pointed to a man maybe he could identify with, and he admired him for his importance. His intelligence is really what stood up. Well, as time went on, what I discovered about this particular patient is he was illiterate. He did not know how to read. And somewhere along the line, he discovered I was a teacher, and what he wanted to do was learn to read in these last moments he had for however long he had left to live. And so we would do work to that end. It helped him feeling like he was accomplishing a life goal that was never realized. But from listening to him, his commentary, from watching The Young and the Restless, this deep need, this end of life task came to the surface. So I just say that to encourage you to realize that a lot can be happening in spaces where we may think nothing is happening. And if we can be present, mindful, and alert, be really listening with our ears, listening with our heart, and giving space, sometimes these things will come up. For chaplain, curiosity, we say, is our superpower. If we can be in spaces with people and be curious, it helps us to feel, at least for me, that I don't need to fix the situation. There really isn't much we can fix. And it's not really our job to fix. I find when we volunteer and we're with people and we're offering presence, it's more of companioning, of having somebody to just be in our space with us so we don't feel alone. And again, to just be curious, why was that gentleman who talked to me about the intelligent man on TV? Why was that what he noticed? That's curious, right? For me to be curious about that. And then open-ended questions. Just tell me more about that, or that's interesting. Why was that? Why was his intelligence something that stood out to you? And not yes and no questions if you're looking to facilitate some type of a conversation. So anyway, I'm going to move ahead a little bit here. Those were the three, for me, the three meaningful P's of presence that help to inform the time that I spend with people. What I wanted to just put here is encouragement for you and all of the wonderful work, the volunteer work, all the kind of work that you may do. I'm sure there's people from a lot of different backgrounds in what you do. But courage is definitely a part of encouragement. Maya Angelou has said, courage is the most important of all of the virtues, because without courage, you can't practice any other virtue consistently. I think the term consistently brings me back to mindfulness. That's what mindfulness will help cultivate in us, is an ability to be consistent and solid in how we show up in life. And the root of the word courage is core for heart, which again, at the beginning, we talked about how mindfulness can be your individual practice, taking time to be present. We can practice mindfulness individually and as we move throughout our day, and it informs the way that we show up, the quality or the essence of our being in spaces. But then there's that heartfulness piece too, the mind and the heart, to allow that, all that we're taking in, to just expand our heart space as we're in places with people. And ultimately, I thought this was an interesting definition when I was reading about courage, is that it's strength in the face of pain or grief. And I think in any setting we're working in, home health, hospice, palliative care, these are places of pain and grief. And it's going to take courage for us to continue to show up every day and be in these places with people so that they're not alone. And so, and that I wanted to encourage you in that space. I know that we may have some of you may have some places for some questions and things. I think what I'll do, because I want to be respectful of time for the whole day of your presentation, of your what you're learning today, is I'm going to read a blessing to you about presence by John O'Donohue, because he's one of my favorites. And I can't help but be a chaplain in any time I'm with people. It's just who I am. What I did for the slide is I took 3 of the key lines from this blessing that really resonated with me. And so I'm just going to read it from start to finish. And I'm going to leave those 3 here, and maybe they'll stand out to you. But as just my hope of encouraging you and my gratitude for the work that you do, I want to leave you with this blessing. It's entitled For Presence. Awaken to the mystery of being here and enter the quiet immensity of your own presence. Have joy and peace in the temple of your senses. Receive encouragement when new frontiers beckon. Respond to the call of your gift and the courage to follow its path. Let the flame of anger free you of all falsity. May warmth of heart keep your presence aflame. May anxiety never linger about you. May your outer dignity mirror an inner dignity of soul. Take time to celebrate the quiet miracles that seek no attention. Be consoled in the secret symmetry of your soul. May you experience each day as a sacred gift woven around the heart of wonder. And that's all I have for you for today. I suppose I don't know how our time's going exactly, but if there's anything that somebody had or wanted to ask, I'm happy to help try to do that for whatever time the moderator feels is available. It was good to be with you today.
Well, thank you so much, Sherry. It's so nice to witness this part of you. Of course, I get the pleasure of working with you every day, and the volunteers get to see you. So thank you so much. This was really a wonderful reminder. Tanya, would you want people to put questions in the chat, or should we move on to our next presenter?
I think if we have any questions, we have time for one or two. I want to make sure and embrace the knowledge of the people that we have sharing with us today.
Yes.
Looks like Bobby has a question.
Sherry, you talked about not fixing anything, but sometimes families have complicated relationships and they have a desire to repair some of those. And not that we as volunteers would do it, but do you ever recommend, us going forth to the volunteer coordinator or someone else to talk about it so that there might be some relationship repair?
Yeah, that's wonderful. Now, when we say don't fix, I don't make that my goal. If we're facilitating, supporting, encouraging, there could be some healing or restoration, fixing in a way that might come out of that. But as far as referrals, it sounds like you're talking more about that. That's important, I think, for volunteers and even workers. When we see something that might benefit from another discipline to come in, to give a referral, to ask those people like Lisa, other volunteer coordinators, they have a wealth of resources that they can provide for families if that's needed. And to keep those ears open and then refer it out. And then that can help. Definitely, that's wonderful use of your time.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for your question. It was great.
There was a question that came to the chat to me. How do you decide the frequency of visits to a hospice patient? Weekly works for one schedule, but might not be best for the patient.
Oh, how do I determine that? Maybe as my role as a chaplain or spiritual care. I would say it goes two ways. One is my own assessment of determining the level for my domain, my discipline of spiritual distress, what level that is and how often they may benefit from my presence there. But I also ask them. I ask them or the family. I will often say, I want to support you. What do you feel would be the most helpful for me to come and see you? Would you like me to come, weekly, every other week, monthly? Some will say to me, they'll say, don't call me, I'll call you. And some say, oh, could you come every day? And I say, no, but I could come every week. So have a conversation. It's, let them help make that decision.
Oh, there's another one, and then we probably want to move on. But Ken says, courage. How does that relate to vulnerability or our own openness?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, when I think about when you say courage and vulnerability, the first person comes to mind is Brene Brown. So you could always read more about her. But very quickly, I think for me, the reason why courage is important is because as I lean into being vulnerable, it can easily activate feelings of insecurity. And am I bringing enough? And will I be able to stand in this pain and suffering? Will I have the right thing to say? I mean, all that inner chatter that can come up can really diminish our ability to be present. So having that heart space, that courage to still lean in when we're feeling vulnerable is definitely necessary. I hope that answers that question. Okay.
Right. Lisa?
I was just looking up I was trying to find the definition of courage. It's something about being afraid, but doing it anyway, or something like that. It's not exactly, that doesn't sound as glamorous as what I wanted it to sound, but
Yeah.
thank you again, Sherry, for all of that. My mind is still sort of wrapping it around it and to see what I can use in my daily life. And I'm sure the volunteers are feeling the same way. So thank you so much. We really do appreciate that.
Thank you. My privilege.
And I'm going to take a quick breath, and I encourage you to do that with me, a slow breath. And we'll move on to our next presenter. So our next presenter is Chrissy Werdeman. She's both a certified validation teacher and dementia practitioner. She's been utilizing the validation method for over 10 years and teaches the validation method to healthcare professionals and caregivers across the country and internationally through workshops, presentations, and course lectures. She is the founder of That Place You Know, LLC, a New Hampshire state licensed day program created for adults living with memory loss, where she successfully practices the validation method in her program. And welcome so much, Chrissy.
Thank you.
I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you. Here we go. So thank you. I'm thrilled to be here, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of this wonderful education series and to specifically talk about this very important topic of meeting your patient or meeting a family in their reality. But my presentation will specifically be focused on individuals that are living with memory loss. And what I mean by that is, as far as memory loss goes, is the different forms and various dementias, as well as Alzheimer's. So my work, just being a validation teacher and practicing it for over 10 years, that will be my focus, is coming from the perspective of the validation method, but also to give you the skills, share the steps and the techniques, validation techniques, so that you can move into someone's reality with real confidence. I love this work. It's my passion. So I'm so happy to be here and be able to share this with you. I'm going to share my screen. There. Okay, so entering my reality, what I say is, before you do that, please wipe your feet. And it may sound a little funny, but in many of the trainings that I have done, this is really a very important step. And what do I mean by this? Well, if you want to enter the reality of the person who is living with memory loss, then this is a critical step before you engage in making that connection into their world. And it really isn't anything different than if you were to enter someone's home. There's safety, there's security. You do, out of respect, wipe your feet on the mat before entering. And we use that same respect when we are entering someone's emotional world and what I call their heart. And just like it was mentioned before with Sherry and last week, the first validation technique is centering. It's a very important technique, and it has to be successfully done in order to move on to our next step, assuming that our intent and our goal is to step into the reality of someone with memory loss. So when we wipe our feet, we're essentially letting go of our agenda. We're quieting our mind. We're letting go of our stresses. And we're just being mindful of being in the presence of someone's world. But I take it a step further because I think it's really important, especially when you are going to be with someone with memory loss, is to let our ego go. Ego is based on fear, the fear of what's going to happen, or the fear of not being in control or not doing it right, or is this visit going to be okay? Am I going to say the right thing? Ego is there to protect us. But if we're entering the world of someone with dementia or Alzheimer's, there is no place for that ego. We have to check it at that door, just like wiping our feet. So in the next slide, I'll talk about it because centering, yes, is absolutely critical. It is the very first technique that gives us the opportunity or helps us develop empathy. But what I do is after I center, and my centering, and I do it throughout my entire day, especially when I'm, I have the social day program. So I'm centering, but I take 3 deep breaths. I breathe in through my nose and I breathe out through my mouth. And it's those long breaths that when I breathe in, I have like this mantra of I'm breathing in new life and I'm breathing out my stress. And I also envision wiping my feet. So wiping our feet then is just literally taking off the dirt that we've picked up on our own journey, right? In our own reality. Because we don't want to bring that into someone else's reality. They're not asking for you to do that. If we do track in that dirt, then it does truly prevent us from being in that moment. And while I am envisioning or I use visualization, which I think is a very powerful, imagery is very powerful means of centering. But I also, when someone asks me to hang up my coat because they want to be with me, then I say, yeah, I'm going to hang up and start layering, like taking off each layer of my ego, each layer of my fear, anything that would prevent me from being in that moment with the person. So hanging up my coat, the coat that I chose to make me comfortable and to keep me safe from wind, rain, snow, hang it up. If I'm wearing a hat, hang that up too, because that's also additional protection. And ultimately, if I'm wearing a scarf, then you're just hanging up the scarf as well. That is added protection. But it's allowing you to completely disrobe your agenda. And sometimes this takes some time. It takes practice. But it is a critical step because you need to do this in order to enter the home and the heart of someone who is living with memory loss. They welcome you. And always remember, above all, that it is their home that they're inviting you to. It is not yours. So wiping that dirt off and not tracking any of that into someone's home is very important. So that's our first step. And we must do that successfully before moving on. And in the presentation, I'm going to be talking about what are these steps, and they build upon one another so that we can achieve empathy and step in to someone's reality. So I'm sure that you're quite familiar with validation method. If you're not, I'm just going to quickly recap. I know that in the hospice volunteer training, the video that you see here, the picture of Naomi File, who's the creator of validation method, she's with Gladys. And this is a beautiful video, very moving, an emotional video that shows her entering Gladys's reality. And it's through validation and the validation method that she's able to achieve this. Validation method, it is a form of communication. And it's through the use of empathy. Empathy is stepping into another person's shoes, stepping into their reality. And it's the ability, with empathy, you have the ability to put your own feelings aside, which is why it's so important to center and wipe our feet, to just quiet our stresses and that inner chatter, so that we're able to share the feelings of another human being for a period of time, not a lifetime, but just this moment in time, which could be our visit. So Naomi states here that validation allows you to accept them for who and where they are in that moment. You don't try to change them, or else you can never achieve the experience of entering their reality. When you enter the reality, you are building trust. And I think about this because when you're building trust with someone, and we could think about it in our own relationships that we have with people. There's some people that we trust, and there's others that we just keep on like, oh, they're good friends, or they're friends, and it's more of a superficiality, but you know that they're good people. But there's some that we truly trust, and we open ourselves up because we know that we will not be judged, that we can let our ego and our fear go and just be with another, which is really, in essence, giving your heart to someone else. So when we build this trust, it's building a bridge from my heart to your heart. And when that happens, they're able to express these emotions and needs that they have had inside. And they may have been bottled up for years and never had the opportunity or the right person to just finally have it come out. So then they could be at peace. And it could be that you've given them that freedom to give them the opportunity to express and communicate. And it could be verbal or nonverbal. And we'll talk about it in the additional slides. but you've given them peace for either in that moment or for that day or until at the end of life. It really is beautiful. It's very moving, it's touching, and it'll change your life. So previously I talked about the human emotions and needs. And when we have stepped into someone's reality with empathy, then they may share with us an emotion that they are feeling, or we may sense that there is a need that hasn't been fulfilled. And so I want to talk about this because when I show the video, I ask a little bit of you to pay attention to what are the emotions that are being expressed. And also, I think these are thought-provoking questions because we can think about ourselves and how we feel even right now. What is the emotions that we can express or that we're feeling? And there's 4 basic emotions that we all share, even with those that are living with dementia and Alzheimer's. And the first basic emotion is love. The love and pure joy that someone feels. They're happy. You know, they're just, you feel that energy. They're just open and they want to have you be a part of this happiness that they're feeling. It's love. And it also is sex too. When someone, we're adults and they may have that feeling of sexual desire, right? They may want that and it gives them that emotion of love, feeling love. And the other emotion is anger. Someone being mad, really not being happy, a displeasure. I have also witnessed in this anger, like people who may have had escalated to a fit of rage. So I just throw that in there. It's not all the time, but I have noticed that anger can escalate to rage. The third emotion that we all share is fear of being scared. And it comes from guilt, a sense of guilt or feeling shame. Or you may see this as someone who has deep anxiety. Their nose may flare and they breathe heavy through their mouth. They're breathing through their mouth. Or, you see their heart, beat. It's racing. That comes as a sense of fear, an emotion of fear. And then the last one is sadness. It's being sad. A state of misery, feeling not so good, but also grief. Someone who is living with memory loss, there's so many losses that they have experienced in their lifetime. And if we think about the loss, like they've experienced the loss of, missing or having one of their loved ones pass away. It could have been 40 years ago, but it's still so fresh in their mind and their heart. Or how about the loss of their home, especially if they've just moved to another home? The loss of growing up in a home, knowing the community, knowing the smell of that home, and now they don't have that anymore. That's a loss of their memory, right? And trying to identify, creating a new identity and what their new reality is. Or loss of verbal speech, loss of mobility. So there's a lot that you can see when someone is feeling sadness, that when we dig a little deeper, it may be because of certain losses that they have experienced. And with the 3 with the 4 basic human emotions, there's also 3 basic human needs that we all experience as human beings. It's the need for love, to feel safe and secure, to be in community that accepts you, or be in relationship with another human being. To have intimacy. When I mean intimacy, like an emotional intimacy, because we have that need for human contact. The second human need is the need for purpose. To feel like your achievements, right? That you have accomplishments that you've had throughout your life, through work, through your vocation or your calling. But to truly have meaningful activity, which gives us self-worth. And then the need for identity, the last one. And that is to be able to express yourself, your unique self. We're all unique human beings, which is a validation principle, that the way that we express ourselves and want to be heard, to be valued, gives us a sense of self-respect. And if someone throughout their lifetime has kind of always taken a back seat or felt like they've had to just conform to others, then when they are living with memory loss, this is a very strong need, because now the ego has gone and they say, hey, this is who I am. Please listen to me. I want to express my uniqueness. So those 4 basic human emotions and 3 basic human needs. And with validation, and I talk about this as a totally separate training, but this is really fascinating work, because you're able to identify someone's emotion and link it, and actually do a link with the behavior to what needs to be fulfilled. But for the purpose of, time and just being able to have empathy and step into someone's reality, we can observe someone's emotion. And it helps us make that connection, that heart-to-heart connection with the other person. Okay, so next I'm going to show you a video. And this video is a foreign short clip. And it is, it's just the beginning snippet that I have. And I think that it really demonstrates what a typical interaction can be with someone who has memory loss, which is when someone is redundant, like they keep repeating themselves over and over again. And I'll stop. And so I think it's important to, one, just recognize that this could be a typical interaction. But when I facilitate support groups, there's like a top 5, like, why does my loved one or why does this person always repeat themselves? It ends up being in the top 5 list, like, what's going on? So this video will present that, but also it gives us an example of, did someone wipe their feet? Did one of the characters wipe their feet, or did they not? Did they enter the reality of in this case, his father? And also in the very beginning, I would love for you to just observe the body posture and the tone of voice and the body positioning, because at the very end, I'll ask some questions and it really will open up a great dialogue within the group. Okay. Okay. And in the beginning, it's going to be a little quiet, but it'll pick up. But there's birds chirping in them in the beginning.
Τι είναι αυτό? Ένα σπουργίτη. Τι είναι αυτό? Μόλις τώρα στο πατέρα, σπουργίτη είναι. Τι είναι αυτό? Ένα σπουργίτη είναι, πατέρα. Ένα σπουργίτη. Σπου-γι-τι! Τι είναι αυτό? Γιατί το κάνεις αυτό το πράγμα, μπορείς να μου πεις? Τόσες φορές σου είπα, είναι ένα σπουργίτη! Δεν το καταλαβαίνεις! Πού πας?
Okay. I love showing that clip as I think it just drives home, the whole idea of wiping our feet and being truly present and being in that person's space, as well as are we entering that person's reality? So go back here to my questions. So in the chat, if you'd like to respond to some of these questions and just open it up for dialogue. There was a little bit to digest there, but what did we just see? Did the son wipe his feet before entering his father's reality? And please feel free. Yeah. Beverly and Tom, no? That's right, Joanne. Yep. Not at all. Exclamation point. That's exactly right. It clearly demonstrates that denial that his father can't help it. Only time. I don't think he was even at the door. Yeah. He just was paying attention to the paper. Yeah. And I would agree with you. I think if we look at it, they were both sitting together on this bench in this beautiful environment, right? The scene was just set up to have this wonderful exchange, or the potential to have a wonderful exchange. Their body position, you could see that they were touching their arms together, but the son, if you had noticed, he actually had turned his body away from his father. And the newspaper really was blocking him from being with his dad, right? The paper was protecting him from entering his father's reality. Even though the environment, they can hear the birds chirping, they could feel the breeze. They're in physically there, but they weren't in each other's reality, were they? And you're right. Dirt was tracked in and there was a disconnect and the door was closed. And going back to the very beginning of the presentation, when we are centering and when we need to disrobe our agenda and ultimately to disrobe our ego, our fear. When we don't do that, then yes, at any point, the person that we are visiting can walk away, can say, no, I want to take my heart back. Like, I don't want to share. I don't feel free. I don't feel safe. And this is what we had seen. He slammed the door. Now, going back to the earlier slide, and I'm going to open this up in the chat, is what was his father's need? Remember the 3 needs that we all share. The need for love, which is to be in community and to be in relationship and have human contact. The need for purpose, which is through work or vocation, having self-worth, or the need for identity, having self-expression. There you go. Annie? To be listened to and respected. Both love and identity. The need for love and identity, yes. Okay. Love, need. Yes, I find that Dad's need was love and identity, the need for identity. To share that he noticed the bird. Yeah. Let's see here. Appreciating empathy for his son as well as the father. To be listened to and respected. Wonderful responses. Thank you. I'm going to go back now. Because in essence, his father did need his son to listen with empathy, right? He wanted to feel safe and feel loved and to be heard, right? He wanted that connection so that he can openly express what he was feeling, what he was seeing. And then when you do that, then there's peace that can be made that his father, had his son gone into his reality, stepped into his reality, his father would have known that, okay, there's that bridge that is made. And this visit that I'm having with my son, I'm at peace, I'm open, I'm feeling free to openly express what I am. And he is understanding me in this moment, maybe not this lifetime, but in this moment. It's really important. So if you look, I'm going to ask you a question, because I think this video really allows us to open it up to looking at, if we know that his father's need, which was the need to be loved, to have that connection, right, to be heard, and it wasn't met, then how did his father express that through an emotion? What was the emotion his father was expressing or showing? What did you observe? Remember, there were 4. Was he sad? Was he fearful? Angry is one. Happy, no, displeasure.
Just in the past few weeks, you know,
Angry and sad, displeasure. Rejected. That's right. Katie says sad. Yeah, you can, and these are all nonverbal cues too, right? His father was really showing his emotion in his face, and then ultimately, walking away. He was angry, sad, defeated. Initially, he was expressing love by trying to connect. Okay, thank you. I'm going to go back to sharing again. And I feel that his father, that emotion there was a sadness there. It was a sadness of, I wish I would have connected. The sparrow, there was significance to the sparrow. When something is repeated, if someone, something, or a story is repeated by someone who has dementia and Alzheimer's, there is significance to that. There is a reason behind that. And it's through stepping into the reality that we're able to dig a little deeper through questions that I'll be talking about, validation techniques and questions, that we're able to kind of unveil what was the significance of the sparrow. It wasn't just by chance that the father was seeing this sparrow, and he repeated it not just once, but twice, 3 times, I think even 4 times. Had the son stepped into his father's reality, what would that have looked like? What would that have looked like? What would have been his body posture? I'm opening it up again in the chat. What would his father have done? I mean, his son done differently. Had he had centered, wiped his feet, and was sitting on that bench? His eye contact, right? How about moving his body so then he would have turned to his father? Yes, he would have put the paper down. Exactly. Oh, no. It's just moving and moving this chat. This is wonderful. Turn and be with his father. That's right. He would have turned towards his father. He would have engaged in the subject of seeing a bird. Correct. Absolutely. Sherry mentioning curiosity earlier. Yes, opportunity for the son to see, to use curiosity and explore that moment. Absolutely. His tone of voice too. Remember at the end, that tone of voice when he was upset and frustrated with his father for repeating about the sparrow, and it kind of brought his father back, like, okay, scared. The tone of voice is important. So yeah, the interaction would have absolutely been different had his son wiped his feet. He could have asked questions, what is the significance of that sparrow? When's the last time you've seen that sparrow, Father? There's a lot. So this is a really great example of the importance of centering, wiping your feet, and having the intent of stepping into someone's world. Yeah, mimic his father's posture. We call that mirroring in matching and mirroring and validation. And I'm going to be talking about that as well. Yes, Elizabeth. Good. Barbara, the son could have smiled. Yeah, there's the power to smiling, right? Smiling is contagious. That's right. So thank you so much for that. I'm going to go back. And at this point, before I move on to the additional steps, that we had talked about. Let me get back here so I'm not losing my spot. Okay. Before we move on, I just want to take a quick poll, because now that we've talked in depth about centering and the importance of it, and then taking it a step further and being able to wipe our feet and disrobe our fear, right, which comes in the form of ego. So then we are better able to step in with empathy and join someone, right, to bridge from my heart to your heart so they feel safe. And then we got to see this video and have some great dialogue and feedback on wiping feet and what could have been done differently. Can we go ahead and do this poll so we just have an idea? So what is the biggest obstacle that prevents you from wiping your feet and entering someone's reality? Yeah, all right. Wow, this is wonderful. All right, we'll end the poll. I think everyone is. See if everyone has answered. 68% have participated. It's anonymous. Okay. So the majority, and Leslie, can we see the results? Share the results. Okay, thank you. So fear of being judged and not doing it correctly. I thank you for one, being honest and doing the poll, because this is a big one, is being able to identify that we do have that fear, is the fear of not being accepted. But it's the exact same fear of someone living with dementia and Alzheimer's. They're afraid of not being accepted. We're one and the same. And the only thing that prevents us is that ego, our personality self, as we call it. Personal stress, being able to close that off in silence and being present. Being able to, as Sherry mentioned, slow down the pace. Press for time with work. That I put that in there because when I do trainings in facilities, this is a big one, especially if you have, if you're task oriented and you have things that need to get done in a specific amount of time, then the feedback I receive from staff is, I don't have time to be able to do this. And by the time that we get done with talking about centering, and that I'm not asking for a meditation, but centering can be very done simply, just by quieting our mind and by breathing. I've been noted to carry on my own blend of essential oils because that helps me as well when I center, and it allows me to envision the wiping the feet and disrobing. So this is wonderful, and I'm not sure. So as we go through the rest of the presentation, your results may change. Just hearing the additional information about validation and the steps and techniques that you can walk away with and feel empowered to say, yeah, I can try it out. I can do it. Okay. Thank you, Leslie. I appreciate it.
You'll probably have to share your screen again.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you. There we go. Okay, so the additional steps, remember, they build on one another. So the first one that I spent a lot of time with is that centering piece and wiping our feet and letting our ego go. that sets us up to succeed. The second step in validation is to observe. There's so much information that we can observe just before we even approach someone, and observing from afar. So even when I have done hospice visits, before I enter someone's room or their home, I do a quick scan. I look around. There's so much information. You know, the artwork, is there music playing, the TV blaring? Where is the person sitting? What's their body posture? How are they positioned? Are they laying down? Are they sleeping? Are they engaged? There's a lot that we can glean from just observing. The next step is matching. So matching what we observe. So then we can better approach the person. And then we're ready at that point to step in with empathy, where we take on the posture and the facial expression and the energy of the person that we're stepping into their reality, the person we're going into their reality. And also at this point, we can better address the person's emotions and their needs. And it could just be that they want the emotion is just that they're feeling sad, right? And just want to have that connection to be with someone. And then once we're there, how do we stay there? How can we still be fully present in that moment? And I'll be talking about validation techniques, verbal and nonverbal. And then at the very end, to end our visit on a positive note. Okay. Okay. Observing. So taking that time, it doesn't have to be 15 minutes at all. It could be just a quick scan. It could be a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, but it's enough so that you are comfortable and that you can understand the space that you are entering, and entering it with complete respect. So what about the posture? Are they sitting upright? Are they standing? Are they leaning forward on their walker? Are they looking down on the ground, right? Their breathing, is it fast, slow, labored? Facial expression, you know, are they piercing their lips? You know, are they smiling? Are they sad? Their energy level and their activity level, right? Are they pacing back and forth, fast, slow? Are they wandering? Are they just sitting there? Are they engaged with a musical instrument? Are they tapping their foot? Are they laughing? These are wonderful things that we can really take on before we even enter in. And it really, what we're doing at this stage is that we're identifying their state of being. We can even identify at this point an emotion that they might be sharing. And that's more incoming data for us. Because the more information that we can glean from observing, it is easier to do the next step, and that is to match an approach so that we're better able to step into their reality. Oh, excuse me. Okay. So matching, we've already observed, but to match even their tone of voice. So if they are, they have a soft tone, then I certainly want to use the exact same tone. I never want to approach and greet somebody with a loud, harsh voice, because right away they will know that, okay, you aren't understanding me. The breathing, the body language, the energy level, is very important. So the energy level, when someone is even pacing and they're moving back and forth, and it seems like they're going from one end of the kitchen to the next, or their hand is running across the countertop, there's a reason for it. There's a reason for that repetitiveness in that motion. And we want to repeat that. There are so many times that when I have approached someone who is walking, I do the exact same thing. If their hands are behind their back and their head is down and they're walking, I am right there with them. Nothing else matters. And if they're mumbling, I'm mumbling. I want them to know that I am with you. I feel you, and I'm in your space. I'm in your presence. So this energy level is important. The eye contact, being able to have the eye contact at eye level, especially if they're sitting, I take a knee. I bend down on my knee and I make sure that they see my eyes. And I may put my hand out. Last week we called it a hand hug, right? But just to gently place your hand on their hand, if when you feel at their energy level that they welcome it. Sometimes they don't, and you know it. Or their hand on the shoulder. But being able to approach them from the front. I don't approach from the side or the back because they may have, their peripheral vision may have diminished, so I don't want to spook them. So the front allows them also to observe who's coming into my space. They're observing just as much as you have observed, believe it or not, and they can pick up so much from an intuitive level. So by the time you've made that eye contact, and if they want to accept you into their reality, they will have the exact same warm eye contact with you. And I have the approach here for the distance because this is something important when we're working with individuals with memory loss, especially in the beginning phase. In validation, we use phases, not stages. So in the very beginning phase, someone may not really be accepting of their new reality, right? They're just hanging on for what they have always known. So when you enter into their space, they may not be ready for you to come in. They may not be welcoming someone to come into their space just quite yet because they're afraid. They're afraid of what just happened, especially if they just moved from their home, right? And they've been placed in another home, another space that is brand new to them, new smells, new senses. They're trying to figure it out. So eye contact may not be ready for eye contact, but their space, they want to keep it separated. But that doesn't mean that later on, when you center and wipe your feet, that you can't join them, but it definitely has to be in their own time in that beginning phase. So when you take on their emotions and energy, at this point, you're taking it in as your own. And it's just allowing them to feel that, she or he is understanding me at this moment. Now you're completely ready to step in with empathy. This is the moment where, when Naomi was talking about, accepting someone for who they are and where they are in that moment, it's through empathy. And that is what validation is based on. You're entering their world, and it allows you, through empathy, it allows you to mirror their feelings through your own. So it's through this facial expression, if they're grimacing or they're smiling, you're doing the exact same thing. You're using the same tone of voice and the body positioning. Clearly in the video that I had shown, that body positioning, there was no matching. Therefore, we couldn't even get to the next step of empathy. If somebody is completely content and they're going through their photo album, I wouldn't come in, singing and dancing. But matching is very important. And when we have now gotten to the stage in meeting the reality with empathy, then we are at one. We are with that bridge, when heart to heart, it's there. There are no cracks in the bridge because our ego is gone. Empathy also allows us to build that rapport and that trust. And we, at this point, we're better able to meet the needs and those emotions of the person in that moment. So once we're there, then what are some techniques, validation techniques that, we're able to address and meet those needs? Well, one is verbal techniques. I've listed 3 for the sake of timing. There's many more, but these are the 3 that are used frequently that you can walk away and use and practice. And this allows us to dig deeper, to be truly engaged in that person's space. The questions of who, what, when, where, and how. We don't ask why, because then we're asking the person who's living with dementia, who already has, their short-term memory is not there, or it has diminished. You want to set them up to succeed. You want to have your engagement, your conversation to be flowing, right? To be open. That's why we ask the open-ended instead of closed questions. Open-ended questions, when we ask why, then we're setting them up to really give us a logical, intellectual answer, a response. And they may not be able to do that, depending upon what phase they're in. And I find that with families, it's very typical to say, so what did you have for dinner last night? One, their loved one may not remember what they had, so they're either going to make it up, or they're going to say they didn't eat, or they may not say anything at all. And really, is that important when you've entered their reality? No, we feel good about making some sort of a conversation. So we leave out the why. And if by chance you do end up saying why, it's okay, because validation is about practicing. It's like learning another language. You don't learn Spanish overnight. You have to keep practicing and practicing. And the beauty of working with individuals who are living with memory loss, there's always forgiveness, always forgiveness. We just have to choose to forgive ourselves. There's a reset button, and try it again. So going back to the video, if we recall, were there certain open-ended questions that could have been asked had the son entered his father's reality, knowing that the sparrow was of significance to the father? Yeah, he could have asked, what is that? What is so important about that sparrow? When was the last time you've seen that sparrow, Father? Where were you? I mean, if he was digging a little deeper to truly understand the meaning. And the next technique, which I love, and it's called rephrasing. I rephrase all the time, especially if someone's verbal skills have diminished and I don't quite know what they're saying and they may meld words together. If I repeat exactly what they say in the same tone, then it just gives the conversation a little pause, and it allows me to think to myself, did I hear this person correctly? And it also gives the person who said it an opportunity to say, is that what I wanted to say? Did that sound right? And then they may word it differently. So you could rephrase 2 or 3 times before truly understanding the emotion or the need. Rephrasing is wonderful. And then reminiscing, especially when I have walked into a home or walked into someone's room, when you are observing, you take that quick scan of maybe Afghans, quilts, artwork, if they're playing music, photo albums, pictures. When we're digging deeper through these open-ended questions, we could be reminiscing as well. And it opens the person up to say, they want to be with me. I will share more. I feel free and safe. There are nonverbal techniques as well. The touch. It's like Sherry had mentioned, of having permission. When we're entering someone's world, then we've already have noticed whether or not through their energy level and also through the emotion, especially if they have some fear or anger, that maybe they don't want to have the touch. But the further, or say as their memory loss has progressed and where they are in their phase, people want to have that touch. We've been starving for that touch, especially since, the pandemic. So just having a nurturing touch, as Naomi Feil has mentioned in her books and certainly in her TED Talks and her webinars, is the nurturing touch. It's that hand holding, or maybe stroking the back of the hand or the arm. Sometimes when I'm walking with someone, I may place my hand between their shoulder blades up above towards their neck, and I might just gently move back and forth as I'm walking with them, just letting them know I am here. And it also, at a cellular level, it does stimulate memories. There's many more techniques to the touch, but this is one of the basic ones that you can walk away with today's presentation and you might try. The other one is anchored touch, usually used when someone is further along in their memory loss. They might have completely, internalized they have turned inward. They may be actively passing at this point. And it's just placing your hand on them. It could be their hand, their back of their hand or their shoulder, and pulling in and just letting them know, I am here. I am in your space, and I'm grateful to be here. At this point, I might hum, I might say a prayer, I might sing, I may just be with them. But those are the 2 touches. Then the eye contact, if you can make that eye contact, usually in that first phase, it might be a little bit difficult until they give you that permission, or in the last phase, their eyes may already be shut, but that does not mean that they do not feel you, that they don't feel your presence. They do. Music, I love music. Music resonates with the soul. It really does. So having music, singing, humming, it does stimulate memories and emotions. Also, when I have entered someone's reality and they have identified with being a singer, for instance, I have one that I'm working with now, a beautiful woman. Her voice is wonderful. And when music is played, we do a duo. She pulls me in and I'm doing a duo. I don't have a great voice. if I'm telling you now, I have an ego right now. I haven't shed it. But when I'm in her reality and the ego is gone, my voice is good. Like, it does not matter. We are a really good duo singing together. And it just makes me feel so happy, and my heart just sings to be able to provide her and let her know that I am with you. I'm feeling what you're feeling. And the way that this emotion of happiness of sharing that with me, and that I can sing. I don't have to hide. It's truly is a gift. And dance and movement, even if someone's in the wheelchair, or they could be, I've worked with individuals that are in a jerry chair, tapping, they move their toes. You know, you can really use this dancing and movement, and see that they're engaged. It may not be through verbal skills, but it could be through just tapping your fingers or placing your hand under theirs and snapping, or like I said, toe tapping. And then of course the power of prayer, the hymns, you could sing it, you can hum it, you can just recite it, but that also resonates. And then again, ending on a positive note. Here's just some examples. At the end, it's really about allowing the person and letting the person know that I am thankful that you've allowed me in your space, in your reality. And knowing that there is a sense of vulnerability that the two of you have shared in order for this to happen, this moment, this peaceful moment to happen. And these are just some examples, but, you know, just saying that, you know, I need to get back to work now. It was great visiting with you, or may I please come back to visit? You know, I look forward to our visits. Or you've taught me a lot today. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. You know, just letting them know that they've shared a part of who they are, and you'd like to come back. One of the things with validation is that to be completely honest, to be transparent, you need transparency. The minute you don't have transparency, you know that centering needs to happen and wiping the feet, because ego has crept in. And so not to lie, but to be completely honest, because you are continuing to build that trusting relationship with this other person. And that supports their feelings of self-worth, self-respect, and also it restores dignity. And finally, when you end it in a positive note, it's just being mindful that you need to take a step back and to give yourself permission to bring your own feelings forward, right? To detach from that person's emotion, their reality, and then take a step back. And I do this through centering. I actually center. I mentioned I center a lot throughout the day, but I center. This really allows me the opportunity to take those deep breaths and realize that, okay, and visualize walking backwards to get my coat, right? So then I can move and, move to the door and to, have my next visit, be prepared for my next visit. So the detachment is very important, because it's just that moment in time. You're not asking to be in someone's world for a lifetime. And then to wrap up, I just want to be cognizant and to realize, let you just recognize that it's not easy to wipe our feet. I know it's not, because we're only human. And we want to naturally protect ourselves. And how we do that is by having our ego present. And some visits, we know that no matter how much we have tried, sometimes we are just not able to do it because our emotions and our needs are that strong in that moment. And it's difficult to have empathy. So not only just to forgive yourself that you're not able to do that in that moment and quiet and settle into that space, but just to recognize it and accept it. It doesn't mean that your next visit won't be, that you won't be able to step into someone's reality and have empathy. It's just that moment. And it doesn't mean that your visit wasn't good at all. Not at all. It just means that maybe perhaps we kept that scarf on. That's all. But when we do have the empathy and we're able to step in with empathy and meet someone in their reality, then the importance of knowing that we've allowed that person to express themselves, maybe express things that they have built up for years and years, and it's finally coming out. So then you have given them peace that you're able to allow them to resolve, and that ultimately that you've walked away, right, with clean feet. It really is, and I mean this from my heart, it truly is a gift that we give to each other. I learned so much more, I feel, by entering someone's world. I do. I learned so much about myself, and I'm constantly grateful, thankful for having someone who has allowed me, has shared their heart with me. So it is a gift. So at the end, I want to share with you a little affirmation. And the affirmation was presented to me while it was years ago, while I was in validation training by one of our validation masters. And so I've adapted it, but I really feel like it pulls what I've discussed in the presentation together. But I believe that at the end of this affirmation, it'll resonate with you. That the work that you already do is so meaningful and it adds value to individuals. That after I read this, just know that you make a difference, and that stepping into someone's reality is a gift for ourselves and to the other person who is living with memory loss. So it's called What I Do. I am more than just a title or position. I am a human being who cares for another human being. I provide compassionate and competent care for those who need it most. I spend quality time with adults who are confused, disoriented, and have memory impairment. Don't call these individuals demented or Alzheimer's patients or even senile. Call them by their names. That is what I do. Look closely into their eyes and listen to their voices. That is what I do. Touch their hearts with your heart. That is what I do. I listen for their present emotions and for glimpses into their past. I ask questions to learn and build rapport. I enter their world and earn their trust so that they can connect with another human being, express their emotions and needs, and restore dignity. I wipe my feet and validate. That is what I do. So I thank you again for giving me this opportunity to share this wonderful information, but my passion. And I hope that I have encouraged you and empowered you to use this information on your next visit or any relationship that you choose to step into that person's reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. That was truly wonderful. I really appreciated just your your presence through that too. I found myself sort of slowing down and entering in, and I could feel us practicing this in the midst of the presentation. So thank you.
Oh, good.
I do
Wonderful.
want to just ask if anyone has any questions that they want to put into the chat for Chrissy. Obviously, she brings a lot of wisdom and practice to this, so want to take advantage of this moment if you have anything that you need to ask. Karen is asking if we might get a copy of the affirmation. Would you be willing to share that document, and we'll put it in the
Yes,
attachment? Thank you.
absolutely. Yes, I can send it, Leslie.
And I see myself on there too.
Yeah.
You do.
So there's so many thank yous. There is a question here about, is there a role for humor?
Yes. Yeah. Humor is, I love humor, especially if that is the way that they may communicate their feelings, is through a sense of humor. Absolutely. Because at times people use their sense of humor to actually hide their fear, right? So meeting them and matching them with that sense of humor and using validating questions can dig a little deeper. But sense of humor is wonderful. Yes. Yeah.
So I'm just going to read this.
Yeah.
It says, I'm not sure that I can articulate this question, but I often see caregivers correcting their elderly relations, the patients, when they misstate things or get confused. It's usually done in a kind, caring manner, and I'm not judging or criticizing them for doing that. I'm sorry. The chat's moving, so I'm having hard time following it. It's usually done in a caring manner, and I'm not judging or criticizing them for doing so. What I'm wondering is, how do you tease out age-related memory loss and those kinds of responses?
That's a great question. Yeah. So the correcting is very typical. We call that reality orientation, which is a method that is still used. And really what is happening is the person or the family or the caregiver who is correcting, right away that they haven't entered the reality of the person, right? They're forcing their reality onto right here, right now, onto their loved one. And so is it really important to correct? I throw that out there, and it isn't just in this audience. I throw it out there to my families that I work with. Is it really important to correct whether the sky is blue or red? There's significance in the reason why they're saying or even noticing the sky, or even the fact that they've said that it was red. So follow-up question for that would be, what makes the sky red, Mom? So it's a fine line, because I never want to step on anyone's toes, but I also want to use it as a moment of education, a moment of allowing them to realize, the family members or even staff members, to just say, is the correction really necessary? Are we really digging deeper and finding out what the meaning is? It's probably more important that we are right. And if that's the case, then we're using our ego. So I I just always use it as an opportunity to educate family members, educate staff to just kind of let go of their ego and to really center and to understand the meaning behind what that person is trying to say.
Thank you. So one final question, and then we'll move on. What if asking the patient questions provokes anxiety because the past seems so scrambled to them?
Mhm. Yeah. So is it provoking anxiety within us? Are we not able to handle their anxiety? Is it anxiety? I mean, if we went and we actually did the steps and we observed and we knew a little bit more about the person and their background, we still go in and we've centered, wiped our feet and observed. The anxiety, that if you truly feel it's anxiety, then it's a sense of fear that they're having. And every emotion is a healing emotion. That is also a validation principle. So having that person be able to express that to you should feel very comforting to you. And if they're able to verbalize, then you can ask some of those validating questions if they have a sense of fear, and be able to link that anxiety to what is this need that they're not having fulfilled at this moment. And the anxiety actually goes down because they finally have been able to take it, to unburden themselves, their heart, with this emotion. So many times I find that when people, they themselves are uncomfortable with anxiety or uncomfortable with anger, we're imposing our own fear of that emotion. It's not the person with memory loss. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? And I think we also are posting the Naomi and Gladys video in the supporting materials. So you'll have an opportunity to see that video or see it again, because that is a wonderful example of stepping into someone's reality and truly being in that moment and being very comfortable and using verbal and nonverbal techniques to dig deeper. It's excellent.
Thank you.
Chrissy,
Yes.
I have a question. Well, I'm thinking as you're talking about even applying some of this with playing with toddlers and how I've used some of the techniques, but it reminds me a lot of my dad. And when he was alive and had dementia, and one day his anger escalated so much that I actually retreated.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess I wanted to ask you what you recommend, because there are some times that people do get violent. And in this case, he did attack my husband. And it was not a good situation, but I know why. We were driving his car and he was no longer able to drive. But the anger kept escalating, or we felt it escalating, and we asked him to go into his apartment. So do you have a recommendation for how, I can't see getting volatile yourself or angry yourself to calm him down. And we tried, but it didn't work. He got stuck. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Mm-hmm. I do. I do. It's a great, all these questions are wonderful. And it's the emotion of anger. And I touched on it earlier that, I have witnessed the escalation of anger to be in rage. And when it becomes at that point of rage, then I myself had to step back, like allow my ego to come into play and to recenter, because at that point, it's a safety issue, not only for that person, but to others around them. And when you clearly state that in what had happened. So anger, yes. Anger is one that when someone expresses it at this point of rage, there is so much more digging deep, like that is stored inside. And it's kind of like these painful feelings that boil up, and then all of a sudden they burst, and they burst by one particular thing. You may have seen the anger coming, and then all of a sudden, boom. And when it booms, right, when the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, that is where we take that step back and we realize at that time, that rage that they have, then it isn't necessarily about the loss of independence, like you had mentioned, the loss of the car. If they had identified with that loss of independence, meaning I don't want to be relying on any of my family members. I've always been an independent person. I've always provided for my family. There is so much more that goes with that identity of losing that car. And that's where we dig a little deeper and figure out, okay, are there other ways that we can connect with whomever it is? You know, there's a validation, another technique, which is wonderful, about tapping into people's preferred senses. I wasn't able to talk about it now, but this is a wonderful way that we can kind of sidetrack over and tap in without the person going into rage, but tap into a preferred sense. So then we can dig deeper on a more calm level. I'm more than happy to talk to you. I'll have my contact information for anyone who has any questions or they want to run something by me. I'm here. It's fascinating work. It's gratifying, it's powerful. So thank you again for having me.
Thank you so much, Chrissy.
Thank you, Chrissy. And now we are going to move on to our last presenter of the day, and we're delighted to have Michael Duffy, who is a certified music practitioner, and he works with us at Home Healthcare, Hospice, and Community Services, where we cover 52 towns in southwestern New Hampshire. Michael has joined us recently and is visiting patients in nursing homes and providing music to them. So I first of all, welcome Michael and thank you for joining us. And if you can let us know a little bit about who and what a music practitioner is, that would be wonderful. And I think I've heard, if we're very lucky, we may actually hear some music from him today. So shall I toss it to you, Michael?
Okay, what is a music practitioner? Well, I'll tell you a little bit about my journey. I got interested in playing music in medical facilities, about 40 years ago, I think, when I had a friend who was a nurse in a children's hospital in Texas, and at Christmas time, I went in and played there. And I had another whole career as a teacher for many years. But about 5-6 years ago, I learned about a program called MHTP, the Music for Healing and Transition Program. And in New England, there's it's affiliated with Concord Hospital. So I went through a training program to be a certified music practitioner at Concord. And it was about 80 hours of classroom instruction and 45 hours of clinical internship in the hospital, in all the different parts of the hospital. So a music practitioner is not a performer. You're not there to play in a way that's expecting a certain type of reaction from the audience. You're not there to play what you want. You're there in service of the patient. So I think that's the first important distinction. And a music practitioner is not a music therapist. So it's not a position that requires state licensing and a 4-year program. You're not there to do rehabilitation in any way. You're not there as a healer. You're there to provide comfort in the moment at the bedside for patients. So I think that's an important distinction. You know, music therapists, they're doing something typically that's related to rehabilitation. It's part of a care plan for the patient. And a music practitioner is there to provide comfort at the bedside. So in a
Michael,
nutshell, yeah.
how do you decide what kind of music you would play to a patient?
Well, first, I think anybody who takes on this role, it's going to be different depending on what your own musical background is, what your level of comfort is with playing. I play a pretty wide variety. I play a lot of classical and Celtic music, but also country music and different types of pop music. There's a phrase that they use in the training that I went through called meet, match, and move. So the first step is trying to meet the patient where they are and understand, you know, what in your repertoire might be a best fit to start with the patient as you're seeing them present themselves. So the type of music, to answer your question, it varies a lot. Sometimes it's a patient who's there and is very alert and maybe simply bored. And you're there to provide musical companionship, you might call it. So in that case, it might be finding music that is appropriate to their, that's something they're familiar with. Maybe they might want to sing along with it. Maybe they're very fatigued and it's just something relaxing and more kind of lullaby type of comfort. So there's a range between that, I think, and a end of life situation where someone's actively dying, where in the training that I went through and what I tend to use is unfamiliar music. If someone is actively dying, the training as I learned it is that you don't want to do something to bring them back into the world. You don't want something that's familiar that's going to draw them back in. You want music that's going to be very reassuring, typically slow, a lot of silences in between musical phrases. So you're acknowledging that you're present with the patient, but you're not trying to actively engage them in a way where they have to respond somehow. So I'd say there's a spectrum between familiar music and that end of life type of music like that.
Do you find that your selection changes as the patient situation changes?
Very much so, yes. As you mentioned, I've only been working with HCS hospice for about 4 months now. And before that, I'd volunteered in a hospice, but I'd worked mostly in hospital settings. But now that I'm working with patients where it might be several months where I'm visiting them, I may start out where they're alert. Again, every patient is different. Every situation is different. But I might start out with very familiar music. Maybe the patient likes country music and I'll come in and play that. Maybe I'm there when family members are there and they'll enjoy something familiar. And with that same patient, often as it gets further towards end of life, I'm not trying to give a familiar music experience. I'm more trying to be present and kind of honor their transition. I find there's certain types of songs that can, not universally, but in a lot of cases, really move patients. And often it's something like a familiar song like Danny Boy, for example, seems to be very meaningful to a lot of people. Somewhere Over the Rainbow, songs like that. So that, yes, the type of music does change depending on the stage that the patient's in. Since you asked, Lorraine, I'm not going to play whole songs, but I'll just give a couple of examples. So something like Danny Boy, when people hear those chords, sometimes, every patient's different, not in all cases, but sometimes that can be cathartic in some ways. I found, especially for families, the family's there, and there can be a certain song like Somewhere Over the Rainbow or Danny Boy, which sort of tugs at the heartstrings in a good way and can create a kind of group experience for the patient and family. So a Danny Boy like that, or a Somewhere Over the Rainbow. So there's some examples of types of songs. I find personally that I think Celtic music, some of the very slow Celtic airs, are wonderful to have in your repertoire because you can speed them up or slow them down. I find them very easy to sort of match where the patient is at. And sometimes I'll use music like that where I have a lot of control over the rhythm of the music to even match the patient's breathing. If a patient is anxious, and I'm watching their rhythms in their breathing and other things going on with them, maybe they're very agitated and moving around, and again, meet, match, and move. I try to meet them where they are, sometimes rhythmically, try to match where they are, and then try to move them if that seems appropriate to help slow them down a little bit. Doesn't always work, but that's sort of a direction I try to go in.
Do you find, and we hear a lot, and we've mentioned today, it's been mentioned, music with people who have dementia. Do you have thoughts about that, and how it does it tap into something deeper in people who are not able to have a real conversation with you? Any stories about that, or any thoughts?
In the 4 months that I've been working hospice now, I've been learning a lot more about dementia, just beginning to learn how to approach music there. As everybody in these presentations has emphasized, this is it's a huge and growing issue, and there's an important role for music there, I think. I've been going into memory care units in the facilities that we serve, and what am I finding? Well, I've got a lot of stories. I mean, even in the past couple of weeks, it's been very moving for me. There's one facility where I would go to, and often our hospice patients would be in the common room sitting with a number of other dementia patients. And I I want to play one-to-one, so I'll sit with our patient that'll be there. But other patients in the room will also be listening while I'm playing. So I had one experience last week, this older gentleman, and I sit there and I'm playing some, oh, I don't know, Take Me Out to the Ball Game type familiar music, and he seemed to be enjoying that. But then I noticed one of the aides that was there walked over, and she was sort of dancing around a little bit as I was playing. So I thought, well, maybe we can up the game a little bit. And I started playing When the Saints Go Marching in kind of a rousing way. And I started standing up and moving around, and this aide was dancing around, and it created this real sense of community in that room. And we had a number of the patients singing along with that, and clapping along with that. So one thing that I found, which I hadn't realized before, is how music can create a sense of community with dementia patients. And I had another experience last week where we had a beautiful sunny day, and patients had been brought out to a outside common area, and were sitting around. And there was something really very moving about playing, old songs from the 1940s to these patients, and I don't know, I got a sense of communication between patients, and that was very powerful. So that's a little tangential, that answer, but in general, with dementia patients, you want to play familiar music and find out what does familiar mean to a particular patient. It's based on age and did they like country music, and did they like show tunes, things like that. Familiar music can also trigger difficult memories as well as good memories. So you want to pay attention. You want to make sure that you're not going to play anything that's going to be disturbing in some way. So you're always observing the patient to see if that might be the case. That seems to rarely happen, but I know it can. Or a song like Somewhere Over the Rainbow, it's associated with a lot of emotion in people's minds. And, sometimes that can be powerful emotions, and perhaps not in a good way.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, yeah.
I assume that different music practitioners play different instruments.
Yes. Just to give another plug for this wonderful program at Concord Hospital that trains certified music practitioners. When I went through the program, and I know currently at Concord, there are people playing keyboard. They have an electronic keyboard that gets wheeled around to the different floors. People play Native American flute. I think some of the most experienced music practitioners are harp players. So there's some wonderful, wonderful harp at Concord. I like playing a very lightweight guitar, because I find one of the things is you have to be very mobile to move from room to room. So I would find it difficult to set up a large harp or a keyboard, and with a nice lightweight guitar, I can quickly move in and out of a room and set up easily and play without sheet music. I like to not have to set up a music stand. There are people also who just sing and have lovely voices and use their voice as the instrument. So there's a lot of different types of instruments that people use for this. But by definition, a music practitioner is working with live music, not recorded music. And a music therapist might be using recorded music instead to get the effect that they want.
Tanya put a great question in the chat, that you mentioned emotion. How do you work with that when with it all, when emotion does arise when you're playing?
I don't think I have an algorithm for that per se. I'm certainly trying to tune into if I'm moving the patient in some way. And, you know, when you say the word emotion, I think, you know, first do no harm. If I felt in any way that it was drawing out some emotion which was difficult for a patient, I would want to pull back. But I do find sometimes that the music can be a catalyst for, sense of loss in the patient, sense of loss in the family. And if I sense and really I need direct encouragement from the patient or the family to continue. But if that's eliciting powerful emotions for them and it's feeling like a good thing for the patient or the family, then I'm all in there and continuing to play. So again, Danny Boy, if I see that it's working, I'll just put everything I can into playing it the best I can for the patient. Another thing and another difference with performing is I will start and stop as needed. Oftentimes there might be, nursing comes into the room and there's a procedure that has to happen. The patient's taking a phone call. They're having a coughing fit. All kinds of reasons you want to be able to just stop and have a little bit of silence and then continue the song later or change songs if you see it's not working. So with respect to emotion, you welcome that if it feels like it's providing comfort for the patient in some way. I think for me, everybody who plays, it's going to be different what music connects with them personally, and then their ability to communicate that. For me, I always come back to like J.S. Bach compositions because I find them so intrinsically beautiful and universal and very flexible in the ways that you can use them and speed them up and use the phrasing of that music, which seems to provide comfort to a lot of people.
And maybe we have time for just one last question that Carol asked, was what do you play when people are actively dying those last couple of days? And maybe you've answered it to some extent.
Yeah, just to give one last story that goes to that question. I had a patient last week who was a kind of a gruff older guy, and I saw he had all these Johnny Cash CDs on his on the table near his bed. So I started in the first few weeks playing Johnny Cash songs for him and old country songs, and we developed some rapport there. But then as he was actively dying the week before last, I won't go into details there. He was having a really difficult time, very physically agitated and moving his limbs, and the aides were in there with him. Also really exhausted. He really, he needed one-to-one care at his bedside to keep him from harming himself. And I played, I tried to match his movement in some way, give little little bits of music that would be, I wanted to see if he remember, I don't know quite how to explain it. Well, I wanted to be present for him, but not to be intrusive. And mostly it involved short phrases of music. Very short phrases trying to match his body movement and breathing in some ways. When I felt he would calm down some, trying to also calm down the music in a way. I guess I don't have a good way to verbalize that very well, but if they're actively dying, the key is unfamiliar music, short phrases. Don't be afraid of a lot of silences in between the phrasing.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's wonderful we've been able to bring music into this conversation. And I think we all know how important music is, to all of us in our lives, and certainly to people at the end of life. So thank you so much. This has been very helpful. We greatly appreciate it. And now, Tanya, back to you.
Thank you so much.
Great, Michael, thank you. It seems so appropriate too, to obviously music is an incredible tool with any of our patients and families, and it really is a way to connect on a very profound level. But I also love that this was kind of paired today with our discussion about people with dementia, memory loss, and that it's just particularly a rich resource and tool there. So we have had an incredible day of content. I'm really excited about how this discussion about meeting patients and families where they're at has just kind of started with a foundation and continued to build and build as we look at it from different aspects. So to let you know, we will follow up with a recording, a link to the recording of today's presentation. So if you have anything that you want to go back and check out later or rewatch or re-listen, you have that option. You can also encourage the other volunteers in your organization to go back and listen to the recorded link. We want to make this available to all the volunteers in our organizations around the state. So just to remind you, we do have one more session next Wednesday from 10 to 12:30. So I hope that you've signed up to join us then. And if you're not able to be live, you can still sign up and receive that recording link. And in today's follow-up, you'll also receive a link to the video that Chrissy talked about. So it's a video of a woman named Gladys Wilson. And she is a person with very advanced memory loss, someone who's no longer verbal and quite isolated in her dementia. And you'll be able to see Naomi File, who Chrissy mentioned, using some of these techniques and actually using music to make the connection and enter Gladys's world. So I would encourage you to go and watch that video later as a way of sort of integrating all of today's conversation and seeing it in action. So thank you all, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Bye.